first thought video on whether Europe is doomed or not, which we can watch. But anyway, I hope that destroyed doubt. The Maloney, the Maloney press bit from NATO. I hope that kind of destroyed all doubt that you had, cleared up all of the confusion that you had about Maloney's position on NATO. Okay. And it's not because I'm like personally super well read on the matter. The reason why I can be confident in my assessment in that situation is because I understand Italian history, specifically Italian fascism, which Maloney very much is an Italian fascist, right? And the only reason why there is any fascist momentum post-World War II in Italy is a direct consequence of NATO involvement.
As the EU enters its twilight years, recent statistics paint a vivid image of decline. Average people, especially children, increasingly face impoverishment, social exclusion, and material deprivation. 54% of people with disabilities can't make ends meet. Able-bodied citizens of the same age aren't far behind at 43%. 20 years of stagnant GDP growth. Real wages, slowly recovering from COVID, remain well below their pre-COVID levels due to greed-fueled inflation. Between 2021 and 2023, energy prices surged by 63%. The ravages of deindustrialization have led to unemployment rates as high as 20%, and the manufacturing sector's value to the EU economy has dropped to just 16%, leaving hollowed out communities, much like those in the US Rust Belt. To make matters worse, a resurgent and violent right wing is gaining power, war between Russia and Ukraine is raging on its borders, and as a US vassal organ, they continue to aid Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. In short, Europe is in crisis. In this episode, we'll take a look at why this is happening and what it means for the future of Europe. Before we answer that, we'd like to take a quick moment to thank this episode's sponsor, Aura. As you all know, we make political content here and on our other channels. Unfortunately, that means some people don't like us very much. These days, a quick Google search is all it takes to find someone's personal information. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all readily available for those who want to find it. That's why I've been using Aura to help keep my private details private. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. This not only cuts down on the amount of spam I get, but also helps me keep all my accounts safe from bad actors. I'll give you a real-world example. AT&T recently revealed that over 73 million customer records, both existing and former customers, were released on the dark web. They recommend that those affected change their passwords, monitor account activity, and consider fraud alerts or credit freezes from credit bureaus. This was...
How about Switzerland? Are they also doomed? I don't know about contemporary. I don't know enough about contemporary Swiss politics, but I will say Switzerland has always been Switzerland and will continue to be Switzerland. Do with that information what you will. I don't know. Maybe look into the Swiss history during World War II. And I saw a hate video about what? I'm Swedish. I saw a hate video about what?
Was a huge breach, but I don't have to worry. Aura does all of this for me. And best of all, I don't have to download a bunch of different apps just because some company couldn't keep my data secure. I value...
Is this decline also prominent in Asia? Again, not something that I'm super knowledgeable on, but as far as I will say, Asian countries are, I mean, depending on which country you're talking about, like Japan has been relatively stable for quite some time, but stable in the direction of capitulation to American imperialism. I don't see that like turning, I don't see that attitude shifting anytime soon, but it never had a lot of mobilization in the other direction. But like Vietnam, as far as I understand, is not susceptible to these kinds of right-wing shifts, but someone can speak on that better. Obviously, China is China and entirely removed from this conversation. Modi in India is a whole different story. Like, it's not when I talk about the Western world, when I talk about the Western sphere of influence, the imperial core, and the right wing shift that you're experiencing, it's definitely different than Asian countries. It's definitely different than the global South and like political mobilization happening in the global South and second world nations and certainly third world nations, like I mentioned. So it's very different. I think there are certainly tremendous issues in a country like India. A lot of issues in Pakistan, a lot, but they're different than what we're talking about. I can't make like a broad sweeping generalization in the same way that I can for like the EU bloc. And even within the EU bloc, when you dial into an individual country and their domestic affairs and their foreign policy, there's obviously still going to be differences. But like there is a broad momentum, an attitude shift in one direction that you can, in relatively reductive terms, cover across the board, because it's like a different. I would say it's the same. It's a very similar. It's a very similar thing that's happening in all these countries with their own personal flavor.
I value my privacy, and I'm sure you value yours. You can go to aura.com/firstthought to start your 2-week free trial, no strings attached. Try it out, and I promise you'll appreciate the peace of mind. Support the show and protect your valuable data by signing up today at the link below. Following World War II, European countries grappled with shattered infrastructure, volatile currencies, and verged on total economic collapse.
What is this?
The economic resurrection of Europe was intricately tied to American aid, most notably through 2 main instruments. First, the Bretton Woods Agreement.
What is this? Oh, I know. I just think it's funny that Hasan brought up France and then said basically the same exact thing I've been trying to explain to Mango Stare. Once again, it's sad. I understand the politics of my homeless country is better than he does. What? Okay, you guys are just having a conversation. Share with the rest of the class. No more personal conversations happening in the chat. Stop having a private conversation. What are you exchanging? What kind of notes are you exchanging in the chat right now? It's lecture time. We're learning about why Europe is doomed. Okay, pay attention.
Established a fixed exchange rate system with the US dollar. This had a stabilizing effect that allowed businesses to engage in cross-border trade with confidence. And second, the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, a bill touted by President Truman and passed by Congress which directly transferred $13.3 billion, or $173 billion today, to European countries to fund the rebuilding of factories, the improvement of transportation networks, and the revitalization of industrial production. This immense financial infusion, while crucial for reconstruction, forced European nations to cede an uncomfortable amount of control over their monetary policy to the United States. This left them unable to adjust to changing market forces by, for example, devaluing their currencies to stimulate their economy. The end result was Europe relying solely on the US dollar. Originally conceived under the influence of Cold War paranoia surrounding supposed Soviet expansionism, NATO's own expansionary trajectory over the decades has only served to deepen US entanglement in European politics and unnecessarily stoke tensions with Russia. From its inception in 1949, the bloc has been expanding aggressively, eventually including former Warsaw Pact countries and even non-aligned states like Sweden and Finland, which joined in 2023. NATO, dominated as it is by American military power, has left European nations heavily reliant on US military capabilities for their defense, leaving them little more than vassal states under American protection.
Yeah, it's a very effective way of neutering the sovereignty of a nation, which ironically enough, France was one of the few European countries that was very critical of this kind of involvement. At the time, obviously it's very different now, but at the time, especially during the Cold War, a lot of European countries personally thought that a NATO involvement would put the crosshairs on them at the behest of the United States of America. It's not like the USSR is readily available and easy to fucking nuke mainland America, but they can very easily send ICBMs to them. That was one of the major reasons as to why they were like, well, we don't want to get the smoke from the USSR at all. And that alignment, albeit they were, happy to receive Marshall Plan dollars, they still recognized that their own personal sovereignty was going away, as they were, in the words of JT here, effectively becoming vassal states for the United States.
This coercive, asymmetrical relationship of military dependence has led the US to intervene in European politics in overt and covert ways, exemplified by a CIA campaign called Operation Gladio. During the Cold War, the CIA and their British counterpart MI6 established a secret paramilitary network, operating under the umbrella of NATO, which operated across Western Europe to resist a potential Soviet threat. These paramilitaries, stationed in Italy, France, Belgium, West Germany, the Netherlands, Greece, Switzerland, and Sweden, harbored stockpiles of weapons and explosives, with some...
Now remember, something to consider here. Post-World War II, right, America quickly shifted their attention, the crosshairs, to a much scarier problem: socialism. Growing socialism, trade unionism, the momentum in the aftermath of World War II was leaning in that direction. Why? Well, because even in formerly fascist nation states, and certainly all of the other countries that either succumb to the Nazi governance or personally resisted against the Nazi governments, all of the guys that were fucking part of the alignment, part of the allied groups in every single one of these countries that we mentioned, were obviously either sympathetic to socialism or directly socialist themselves, or social democrats or trade unionists. Those were the most popular, that was the most popular game in town, because the Nazis had lost. They were brutal. They were repressive. And therefore, people were understandably very excited at the prospect that, like, the resistance was successful. They were like, well, you guys are the ones who saved us. If you recall, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, when French people were specifically polled on who shouldered the greatest burden in defeating the Nazis, overwhelmingly the French population saw the USSR as the major responsible party for defeating the Nazis. And because it's true, right? They took a heavy toll. 27 million people died in the USSR fighting against the Nazis. So America had a unique problem. They wanted to enforce their influence and quickly take advantage of the destabilization that was occurring in Western Europe. So they implemented the Marshall Plan, obviously, in an effort to rebuild Europe. America itself, far removed from the immediate damages of the conflict because they were so far away from where it was happening, did not have the same economic struggles of redevelopment that, for example, the USSR would go through. So they took advantage of they took advantage of their fortuitous geopolitical position and started implementing certain policies in Western Europe, rebuilding Western Europe, while still simultaneously recognizing that there's a lot of these like socialists and trade unionists in positions of prominence now. So they wanted to defeat their influence, and maybe even in some instances, they wanted to kill them or cause chaos in general with acts of terrorism. So who, if you are class, chat, if you are an American general, if you are a part of the American State Department and you see communism as the great evil, okay, perhaps an even greater evil than the Nazis, right? And you see these fucking disgusting little pinko red commies being celebrated as champions, right? Who do you go to fight against them? Who were the best anti-socialist fighters? If you said fascists, well, you'd be right. That is exactly who was the best anti-socialist, anti-communist fighters in all of these countries. The fascists that didn't get killed, or the fascists that, didn't withstand any kind of serious scrutiny. They were still around. Their children were still around. So what did America do? Through NATO, they put anti-communist fascists to task. Started giving them weapons, started causing them to stockpile weapons in general, started giving them directives, and even in certain instances, directly training them. There is no better example of this than the very public, broad daylight fascist promotion of power in West Germany. Almost every single NATO commander from Western Germany were directly involved. Okay, were directly involved in the Nazi regime, some of which were prominent members that didn't even participate in the plots against Adolf Hitler, mind you. Like, we're not talking about people who were like, man, this Adolf Hitler guy, Adolf, he's going a little bit too far. Yeah, maybe we should kill him. Like, not those generals. I'm talking generals who were like, yes, we love the Adolf. He was very good, misunderstood, yeah. Lebensraum is just living space. That kind of shit. Those kinds of generals were put into positions of power in NATO. And it's not like this is hidden. This is not something that was done in secrecy. This was something that was done in broad daylight. You can Google it. Look up NATO. Look up page denied. What is this? Comptroller General of the United States. Nazis and Axis collaborators were used to further anti-communist objectives in Europe. Some immigrated to the United States. No, it's not Paperclip. Paperclip is different. Operation Paperclip was taking German scientists, Nazi scientists, and bringing them to the United States that played a formative role in the development of NASA because of their rocket propulsion technology. And the USSR had their own version of that as well. What we're talking about is Gladio. Yeah, Adolf Heusinger is who I'm talking about, of course. A Nazi military officer whose career spanned the German Empire, the Weimar Republic, Nazi Germany, and West Germany, and NATO. Yeah. History.net. These NATO generals had unusual backgrounds. They served in the Third Reich. The second worst Adolf H. Yeah, not the big guy.
Some caches remaining unaccounted for even after decommissioning. What did they need stockpiles of weapons and explosives for? To enable right-wing terrorists to carry out attacks which were blamed on non-existent communist militants. The numbers are horrific. Between January 1st, 1969 and December 31st, 1987, there were 14,591, quote, acts of violence with a political motivation. Oh, and by the way, that number is for Italy alone. The Piazza Fontana massacre of 1969 marked the beginning of the violence.
This stuff was pretty violent, pretty gruesome. They also collaborated with the Italian Illuminati at the time, which is pretty interesting and funny considering that it's considering its prescience and its importance in contemporary Italian politics, considering that even Berlusconi, the Italian Freemasons, yeah, the mob, the Italian Freemasons, and even someone like Berlusconi was directly linked back to Freemasons, not Illuminati. Sorry, not Illuminati, the Freemasons. Even Berlusconi himself was a member.
The bomb in Milan killing 16 people and injuring 88. This was followed by countless other attacks. The Petiano attack in 1972 killed 3 military police officers in a car bomb explosion. The 1974 Brescia bombing, which targeted an anti-fascist demonstration, resulted in 8 deaths and over 100 injuries. Later that year, the Italicus Express bombing killed 12 and injured 48. But the most notorious incident occurred on August 2nd, 1980. A massive explosion ripped through the Bologna railway station, killing 85 and injuring 200. Hopefully this gives you a taste for how far US-aligned European countries are willing to go to appease the US. This loyalty isn't surprising since the US handpicked the leaders of Italy.
Propaganda 2.
Italy, France, and Greece in rigged elections in the 1940s. In Greece, when the British and their 40,000 troops found themselves unable to crush the communists there, they turned to the United States. And Greece became the first victim of, and the model for, the Truman Doctrine, which was a US policy to shape the course of European politics to align with American interests and, quote, contain communism by any means necessary. In France, Ambassador Jefferson Caffrey made it abundantly clear that economic aid to France was contingent on the exclusion of communists from the government, despite their overwhelming popularity in the 1946 elections.
So back home, the U.S. was airing anti-fascist programming, yet shamelessly using far-right militias and groups to flush out communists. Some things never changed law. No, they weren't. At this point, this is post-World War II. So they weren't airing anti-fascist programming at all. You're thinking pre-World War II when they were doing that. Post-World War II, they were not. At that point, post-World War II, we're talking any kind of movement, any kind of trade unionist movement, any kind of socialist movement, any kind of demonstration is seen as like communist nonsense, including but not limited to the civil rights movement. As a matter of fact, one of the major criticisms against Martin Luther King Jr. was that he was a commie. He was a commie agent and a collaborator, if you recall. So at that point, the United States attitude from in its domestic affairs had absolutely swung in the fascist direction, anti-communist direction.
And in Italy, the CIA secretly funded political parties to the tune of $5 million a year to prevent a communist electoral victory in 1948. Speaking of 1948, the most shameful, destructive, and glaring example of EU vassalage to the US is their historical and continued support for Israel and their massacre of the Palestinian people. Many EU nations have supported and funded Israel since its founding. Let's take a quick look at their recent activity. The primary means by which the EU renders financial assistance to Israel is via funding programs such as Horizon Europe, which is allocating...
For the record, one thing to understand from the chaos in Italy at the time, Operation Gladio wasn't just about like making it unsafe to be an open socialist in a whole ass other country or a trade unionist or even a fucking social democrat. Like if you were center left, you were in the crosshairs of these scumbags, right? We're not talking about like dudes who are straight up card carrying Communist Party members. We're talking anyone and everyone. And this is, by the way, identical to Indonesia with the Jakarta method, identical to every other area where the United States was ever involved in the affairs of a foreign nation. It was about wiping out any and every group that the fascist far right the fascist far right government would consider a problem. In Indonesia, student protesters were a part of it. You know what I mean? In Indonesia, gay people, student protesters, like, you know, queer liberation organizations, all of that. It was all encompassing. So that's also something to consider as well. Trade unionists were massacred, slaughtered, but it wasn't just about making it unsafe to be anyone that was like even center left. It also was about creating an environment that was unsustainable, very volatile, because like a lot of that violence, especially because it was being done by like these random groups, who knows who's doing it, would then lead governments to take additional action. Because then the people would be like, well, what the fuck's going on? There's explosions happening all the time. Bring in the fucking police force. You know, create an environment of sustainability, create an environment of safety. What the fuck is your job? Your job is to do that, right? So basically, in that situation, the governments would then take aggressive action, maybe even martial law in certain instances, to create a safe environment, which then would, of course, lead to even more direct, aggressive legislative action against those who were perceived as enemies of the American state, collaborators of socialists. Okay? So I guess this is part of the reason why, for those who are uninitiated, for those who are new here, this is part of the reason why I'm very anti-NATO. I am Turkish myself, of course. This another reason, because I saw this exact same kind of violence and these exact same type of actions being conducted in my country as well, in my country's history, played a very prominent role. But not only that, but also But also, this is why I say, these are the reasons as to why I say America, a lot of promise, but ultimately doing a lot of bad historically. Okay? And that's important to consider because a lot of people I see online that get clip chimped into oblivion thinking that I'm like, I'm a campist, or I simply am like anti-America for no reason. Rarely ever understand why I'm taking these positions. And I guess they're not well read on America's actions during the Cold War. So they personally think that there is no real valid reason as to be critical, as to why I'm critical of the United States and its actions. They think that it's just like, oh, I just hate America. It is reactionary thinking to assume that. You are basically you're basically bludgeoning your head with anti-intellectual thought in order to justify your position. When you go, oh, dude, you hate America. It's something that you hear, that you used to hear from right-wing reactionaries all the time. It's something that I've heard a million times over. If you don't love it, leave. You are an anti-American piece of shit. Fuck you. From the likes of Steven Crowder and their fan bases. Now, as America's empire crumbles a little bit, or its like soft power capabilities diminish every day in broad daylight, as we see what is going on in the world, and our hegemonic superpower status is like called to question. Okay. You see a lot more people that recognize those contradictions and start feeling anxiety. Okay. Start feeling a sense of insecurity and a sense of anxiety. And then they turn around and also engage in this reactionary framing from ostensibly what you would consider to be the liberal side, the left side of American politics. That's why you see a lot more liberals also assuming that exact same position that you would only hear from, right-wing shitheads 10 years ago. But what about China, Hasan? Great question. The what about China was, back in the day, what about the USSR? That was precisely what this campaign was. You are watching the what about USSR and all of the violent actions that unfolded at the behest of the what about the USSR question.
An eye-watering 111 billion euros in grants through 2027. While it's not clear whether the entire sum is going to Israel, the fact that they're getting anything is horrifying. It's already funded 1,600 Israeli research and innovation projects between 2014 and 2020. As far as individual EU member states are concerned, Germany is the second largest exporter of arms to Israel, to the tune of $353 million in 2023 alone. This funding and sale of arms makes Germany as complicit as the United States in Israel's countless war crimes, decades of human rights violations, and the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians. In recent events, the Russia-Ukraine war shattered the EU's tenuous grasp on energy security. The EU's heavy dependence on Russian energy exports, natural gas in particular, suddenly became a crisis nearly as dire as the war itself. To give you an idea of how insecure the EU's energy supply was before the war, in 2020, over 85% of the gas consumed in the EU originated from external sources, with Russia accounting.
Why are some right-wingers of the USA anti-NATO then? Oh, dude, the easiest question of all time, easiest answer of all time. They're fucking stupid. That's it. That's why I personally love right-wingers who now love Russia. Because, like, their entire lives, they've been convinced that the USSR is the great evil, right? And then all of a sudden, they get into a fucking Telegram channel with a couple FSB operatives in it being like, yes, Vladimir Putin is doing great things. He's killing trans people. He's invading a special military operation in Ukraine because Ukraine is gay. And they're like, hell yeah, brother, I love Russia now. I fucking hate NATO. Yeah. Like, imagine going against your entire lives social programming on a whim because a couple dudes told you that, like, Russia is also anti-gay. Like, you have to be the absolute dumbest person on the fucking planet to get duped that way. And
tensions, notably Russia's war with Ukraine, have reinvigorated debates on Europe's autonomy and the role the US plays in perpetuating conflict and antagonizing other nations. The EU has begun to voice serious concerns about US reliability, one notable example being French President Emmanuel Macron, who has strongly advocated for reducing dependence on American arms and enhancing Europe's military capabilities. The US seems to be toying with a serious disengagement from Europe.
Yeah, stakeholders, just a way to obfuscate labor versus capital. Just finished business school, lol. Yes. And even that's a bridge too far, is what I was trying to say. Because that's not stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism is still absolutely firmly placed within the boundaries of capitalism, which of course is a bourgeois-run economic structure that benefits capital owners regardless. It's basically a whitewashing initiative of the same dynamic, the same contradictions that exist under capitalism, and yet even that is considered a bridge too far for many capitalists who have grown fat under the current way of existing. Under our current mechanisms of production, they benefit. They're so used to endless growth and the American government and the Western liberal capitalist nations constantly looking for new markets that they can exploit, constantly opening up new vectors of exploitation by way of imperialism and dominance and the unequal extraction that we engage in with the global South, that they're just like, no, we're not even doing that. Shut the fuck up. That's commie talk, even though it's not. It is a way to try and preserve capitalism in the same way that welfare was seen as a reasonable middle ground when the USSR existed in an effort to basically continue extending the lifeline of the capitalist mode of production. Welfare originally was fought hard for. Social safety nets were originally fought hard for by obviously communists, trade unionists, socialists alike, and it unironically gave capitalism an extension, an additional lifeline, so that it could not succumb under the weight of its own contradictions. And yet, given the interest of capital owners and their endless need for growth, and also given the reality that profit rates do tend to decline, people still, those who are in positions of power, capital owners, still very much advocate against their best interest. And instead of continuing capitalism, instead of trying to breathe life back into capitalism, they want to make things worse and worse until the structure collapses. And in that collapse, as things stand currently, because there is no counterbalance, no counterweight to capitalist forces, all we will see is fascism. That's where you're at now. Fascism is a way to maintain order as capitalism decays.
Driven by an enthusiastic pivot towards Asia as part of the Biden regime foreign policy strategy, the EU sees the writing on the wall and would be wise to
That's why you still got motherfuckers like this. Communism sucks. The only thing he's good at is starving a population under it. You shouldn't be a communist. I shouldn't. You're right. You know, I'm rich. I could very easily just drop everything and become a fucking capital owner and allow capital accumulation to happen. So you're right. I shouldn't be, but you, Persian soldier, you probably should. It's just pure self-interest for you. Think about that.
decouple itself from an increasingly unstable and violent United States. Episodes like this one are made possible thanks to our generous patrons.
Motherfuckers would be like, bro, communism is so bad. It means bread lines and no food, right? As the guy saying that is literally like one accident removed from fucking permanent medical debt, and also not being able to put food on the fucking table forever. Sick, man. Thank you. Communism embraces totalitarianism. Yeah, no, totally. You're absolutely correct on that. First of all, communism has never existed on the planet unless you're talking about primitive communism, you know, that far predates all other mechanisms of production that we have tried and have failed to keep alive. But the idea that like we've had communism and that communism embraces totalitarianism is laughable. I think you're talking about the socialist project of the Soviet states, which never arrived at communism at all. The goal is to evolve. Anyway. Communism and socialism seems good, but goes against human nature. Yes, thank you, dude. The elementary talking points that I've definitely never actually encountered before in my entire life as a champagne socialist myself, publicly so for the past, you know, almost a decade. Yeah. This right here, in the most debate bro terms, is the naturalistic argument. It's a fallacy. You're doing a logical fallacy. There's nothing natural about fucking skyscrapers, okay? There's nothing natural about getting in a fucking tin can and flying from New York City to Los Angeles in a span of 4 hours. All matter of human existence is literally dominating nature, okay? The fuck do you mean? The idea that like, oh, is simply it simply goes against our nature is so silly. Yeah, I like the guy who picked the username Persian Soldier to type on the internet, perhaps thousands of miles away, through a series of interconnected wires and fiber optic cables, only to, in real time, basically, get me, thousands of miles away, to read what he had to say with an account that he created today, by the way, with a sock account that he created today, that communism and socialism seems good, but is against human nature. What part of your existence is natural? Also, in debate bro terms, factually inaccurate. Humans are naturally social animals, the most social in history. Socialism and communal interest is literally in our nature more than any form of capital. Yes. It's like when people say war is a part of human nature. It's not. You say war is a part of human nature as you are living in one of the most collaborative periods in human history. Like, the fuck? Some domestic Israel news, there's an internal chasm that formed the war cabinet as Gallant publicly opposed Bibi's plan for a year-long military occupation in Gaza. Gantz, along with people outside the coalition, stand behind Gallant, while Bibi, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and much of Likud are now calling for his resignation. This little Bibi Gallant feud has gone on for a while now, but was mostly fought by leaking war cabinet statements to the press and shit. Now it's really blowing up. It is always the ones who aren't benefiting from a capitalist society that hate communism. Well, no, the people that hate socialism, not even communism, but like the people that hate Marxism for the most part, like the most avowed defenders of capitalism are obviously still the capital owners. They understand that the class war exists. They're winning. And when you're winning, you try to make everyone else who is losing in the class war feel like there is no class war at all. They shift your attention away to other things. And many people are willing participants in this narrative, and they become loyal soldiers to their bosses because they have this peasant brain, the peasant mentality. That's why they come in here and yell at me for being a socialist grifter, for example, thinking that they've owned me by saying that I am financially successful. This is not an own at all. Demanding that I take a position that they're used to. Know your place, sir. You are my master, they say. You are my master, and you should actually continue to advocate for my demise, as all of my masters have before you. If you were to do that and then tell me that I actually do have an opportunity for advancement, I would much more likely to be a willing participant in this conversation who loves you and adores you. Please stop telling me that the system is fucked up and designed against me. I do not like to hear that. I like to be sedated. I like to feel like I have the opportunity to dominate and be like you one day. All right. So,